Welcome back, Principles of Accounting 2 students. We are on chapter 23, and I'm going to cover one of the more difficult concepts, not the most difficult, but one of the more difficult concepts that you'll see this semester, and it is your variable cost and your fixed cost overhead variances. This is late in the chapter, and you have a couple homework problems that are relatively complicated. Slightly more complicated than you'll see on the test, but that's good because you want to have this exposure if possible. So the first thing we have, I created over here a nice handy dandy spreadsheet, and these red boxes are going to be data that we fill out. And I've actually got it figured out that all these things that say divide by 0, those are going to be formulas that once I fill out the red boxes will automatically populate. And I'll give you a secret over here. This will actually populate the answer. So I have this all set up to go, and getting it set up was a little bit time consuming, but very worth it. The other thing we have over here, this is over in your homework manager, is we're having this problem, and it's I think at number 6 or so on your thing, and it's going to have all of this data, which is overwhelming, and it's designed to be overwhelming. And then you have all this data, which on these problems, it's impossible to just read that data and understand it. So the first goal in doing a problem like this is to get it out of your homework manager and into either a very nice piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet so that you can manage the data. So let's read the problem here. We've got a company called Great Fender. Now your homework problem will be very similar to this, but all the numbers will be different. So you got that going for you. So they use a standard cost accounting system. They manufactured 20,000 boat fenders during 2014. All right, so 20,000, right, and that's how much they manufactured. So we call that actual. So I wrote over here, fenders manufactured, actual, 20,000. And I set it up so that it's a comma afterwards. And if you notice, some of these already, the formula is already populated. We'll get into that in a minute. Right now, all I'm doing is transferring data out of a paragraph into information I can use. Okay, so they made 20,000 boat fenders using 146,000 square feet of extruded vinyl. Okay. So that's going to be your total vinyl used, and this is actually what they did in real life. They made 146,000 square feet of vinyl to make 20,000 fenders. So the first thing I did right here, formula-wise, is I said, well, I could figure out how much vinyl was actually used per fender on average just by taking your 146,000 feet of vinyl divided by your 20,000 fenders. So maybe I'll use that later, maybe I won't, but I think it's a pretty neat little piece of information there, right? You know, you make a fender, it takes about 7.3 feet of vinyl, all right. And again, these are all materials. I still have no idea what the problem's asking us to do. I'm just taking data, making it information at this point. All right, so far we've only had 2 pieces of information. I'm on line 2 of this problem. And it says that we purchased the 146,000 square feet for $1.10 per square foot. So I created here purchase price per square foot. So for each square feet, it cost me $1.10. All right. Now I could also say $1.10 times 146,000 would give me how much I spent on materials to make 20,000 vendors, but sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. But let's just keep moving on. Production requires 410 direct labor hours. All right, so now we're on labor hours. So up here I have some materials. Here we've got actual direct labor hours. It's going to take me 410 labor hours to make 20,000 fenders. All right. And they cost $14 per hour. So that's what we pay, folks. So there's my $14 per hour. Here I went ahead and calculated labor hours per fender, right? So I took the 410 hours divided by 20,000 fenders, which means it's 0.02 hours, which is not many minutes. Let's equal 60 minutes times 0.02, and 1.2 minutes, something like that. Okay, totally besides the point. So anyway, it doesn't take much labor to make a fender. It's all machines. All right, so we got the $14 per hour, the direct material standard. So now we're talking about standard. So you see over here I have a column called actual. Here's your column called standard. Now, where these problems are kind of a pain in the neck is they give you slightly different data for your standard than they do for your actual. And it just gets, like, it be a big problem really quickly, which is why you have to organize this into something you can understand. Direct material standard was 7 square feet of vinyl per fender. Well, I have down here, right? So here it was 7.3, and I had to calculate that based on all this information. Whereas here I figured out it was 7 square feet is my standard. All right. Standard cost of $1.15 per square foot. $1.15 goes right there. The labor standard, okay, now we're at labor, was 2.026 direct labor hours. Remember, I calculated this here, 0.026. Here they're just giving me that number. My labor hours automatically populated. How did it automatically populate? I took the 0.026 times fenders, and I multiplied it by the actual fender, because this is really a flexible budget we're creating here. We're going to need this later. That's an important number, and for those of you struggling, especially when you get over to the fixed overhead, this is the number that you're going to need for something. We'll get there in a bit. At the standard cost of $13 per hour, we're talking about labor. So again, we expected the cost 13. It actually cost us 14. We expected it to take 0.026 hours. It took less, so that's good. All right. Then it says consider the following. When I click on this, I get all this info here. Now, what's weird about this problem versus what's in the book is they're really doing a lot of wordplay here. Like they're saying static and standard, and most of the time those are the same things, but in this problem they're not. Like your static budget's going to be really your planned activity at your planned prices, and the standard is actually going to be the actual activity at the actual prices. So think of it that way. So my static budget, think of this as flexible budget, and you'll be okay. Static budget variable overhead of $59.40. So now I'm down here, and it says static budget $59.40. Static budget fixed overhead of $23,760. And this is probably going to take you an hour just to fill this stuff in, and that's okay. You'll get better at this as time goes on. Static budget direct labor hours. That's this right here, and you might have to fish around for a little bit, figure out where these things go to make the most sense. Couple things changed here. And let's see, I plugged this in here. My variable overhead cost per hour became 10. How'd that happen? I took the $59.40 and divided it by my labor hours. And that gets me a cost. Here's my variable cost. There's my labor hours. You divide the two, you get $10. Same thing with the fixed. So here I figured out I take the $23,740 times my 594 planned hours, gives me $40. So then I can now take this $40 per labor hour and multiply it by my, C2. I can take my 20,000 labor hours and multiply it by my labor hours per fender to get my total labor hours there. And this is your flexible budget. So let's take a look at that again. 20,000 actual fenders which means the flexible budget's 520. This one here, this is what I thought I was looking at before, E15 times D7. So you have your fixed overhead times your 520 labor hours gives you your flexible budget overhead. So in accounting terms, this is your budgeted fixed overhead. This is your applied. I'm expecting $40 an hour. And I worked 0.026 hours. Right? Is that right? No. 520 hours. 40, 520. So look at that for a second. I'm going to take a second so that you can stare at that again. This number here is going to be E15, $40, times the applied labor hours, which are going to be your actual fenders manufactured, times your labor hours per fender standard. In 90% of the problems you do, these two numbers are going to be the same, but not in this one. All right. So we got the 594 static budget number of units, 23,000. So this is your plan. So you actually made less than you expected. All right. Now we have even more data over in this column. So greater fender allocates manufacturing overhead based on standard direct labor hours. So that's important in this problem, right? We're going to take standard labor hours and we're going to do all our allocating based on that. Great Fender reported the following actual results. So now we're back in actual. Actual variable overhead of 4420. And actual fixed overhead of 27,000. And again, down here, the variable cost per hour populates. Again, you take this divided by the number of hours, this divided by the number of hours. Hopefully C7, yes, okay. All right. So the first thing they're gonna want us to do, and actually we don't need this anymore. So I can expand this. And if you notice, I already set this up so that these populate. And that's nice. And actually, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. And just organize things the way I want. All right, so then one of the things you're going to notice as well. So if you remember the transitive property of algebra, these are the formulas that the book gives you. Right? We have a variable overhead cost variance. You got a variable overhead efficiency variance. But when you actually go into your homework manager, it's going to give you something slightly different because they're using the transitive property of algebra. So let's see if I can do this. Okay, you have AC minus SC, right, and those are in parentheses. And you go times AQ. So then, in order to get the formula that they want from the drop-down menu, you take AC times AQ minus SC times AQ. And then we also know just from studying the actual cost times actual quantity. Oh, sorry, I'm off the page. Let's do this real quick. No, that won't work. How do I make this? I can't do it. Yeah, it's not going to let me make this larger. Okay. Actual cost by actual quantity is going to be actual variable overhead minus SCAQ. And sure enough, if I go down here, there's something wrong here. Something's not right with my video. What if oh, because I have to get rid of that, that's why. Actual variable overhead times AC times AQ. All right. So same formula, just one's a little bit more condensed from an algebraic standpoint. Either formula will get you the right answer. All right, I'm going to redo this for us. All right, so what do? We take our actual cost. Watch, I'll do this wrong. This will be blessed. What's my actual cost for variable overhead? So right now we're kind of ignoring most of this data, but hey, we didn't know that beforehand, because right now they're just concerned with overhead. Your actual cost for overhead, and that what they're usually asking for with actual cost is your actual cost per hour. Minus your standard cost, and you're going to want to put these in parentheses. And again, this if you do total, you're going to be off. You want to do per hour times actual quantity, and that's going to be quantity of labor hours. Why is it quantity of labor hours? Because we're allocating overhead based on labor hours. And that's going to give us 320, which is our variance. Now the other question would be, is this favorable or unfavorable? Well, I'm going to do that up here. So what we're looking at is cost variance, so we're looking at the difference in cost. So it cost me $11. I expected it to cost me $10. That's not favorable. Ooh, that's an unfavorable variance. Okay. So then the second one, you have your variable overhead variance. This is our efficiency variance. We have our actual quantity minus standard quantity times standard cost. Same concept there. They're going to use the transitive property, and they're going to ask you for the actual overhead. But let's go ahead and do it the way the book shows us. Actual quantity of labor hours. So what we're looking for is efficiency. So we're looking for use. Since we're allocating based on labor hours, we're going to do that. We're going to do total labor hours. So actual quantity minus standard cost. Which one do we use? I don't remember. Let's try that one. Let's try that one. There we go. Times standard actual quantity, standard quantity times standard cost. Standard cost per hour is going to be variable cost per hour. And let's try D7. There we go. So this is where we're going to use the standard, quantity. Makes sense. Whereas up here we used E14. All right, so now let's ask real quick. We got 594 hours, 410 hours. Oh, right, yeah. This is standard quantity because it's multiplied by the actual units. Sorry, I'm mumbling. Okay, so here we got to figure out if this is favorable or unfavorable. We got our actual quantity here of 410. We got our standard quantity of 520. We used less than we expected. This number is irrelevant because it's at planned or budgeted hours. Whereas here, this number is on actual hours. So we used less than we thought we would, which is good. That would be favorable. All right. So that's where that 520 number comes into place. This could take you an hour to try to figure out where that 520 comes in. So make sure you look at this first. Variable overhead cost variance. Actual overhead minus budgeted overhead. That one's really straightforward. What's our actual fixed overhead? Minus our budgeted overhead. Again, budgeted is static. 3240. And remember, since it's fixed, what we just say is, well, we spent more than we expected, so that's unfavorable. And then we have our fixed overhead. I'm going to do it up here. Actually, I won't. I'll do it just a little below. I'll do it here. You got your fixed overhead variance. I'm going to put University of Florida there and get rid of these. Okay. Your fixed overhead variable is budgeted minus allocated. All right. So notice up here I already did the allocated. Here's our budgeted. So once we get this number, it's easy. How do we get that number? Well, we figured here's our budget, and here's how much our fixed overhead costs based on our budgeted labor hours. So we take that and we multiply it by the actual number of labor hours, and we get 20,800. So once we get that number, which we've already gotten, we're going to take the budgeted minus the allocated, and that's going to get us 2960. And the other question would be, all right, we budgeted for this. Now usually with fixed overhead it's a little bit backwards because you budgeted for that, which means you're pretty sure that's going to be your overhead, but you didn't allocate everything that you budgeted, which means now you need to make an adjusting entry to allocate the rest of it, which is bad. So that's actually unfavorable because you under allocated. You need to allocate all of this and you didn't. And that's what we call the volume variance, and that's the variance based on different stages of production. Because here we planned on allocating through 23,500 units, but we only did for 20,000. More pertinently, 594 hours, 520 hours, since we're doing this based on hours. So that should get you through problem 23-20. It is a relatively complicated problem. I can pretty much guarantee, now I'm saying this on April 1st, so April Fool's Day, on 2015. I know this semester that you're only going to see overhead variance on your homeworks and your study plans, and maybe your quizzes, but you're not going to see it on your test. Now, if you're reading this or watching this in 2016, 2017, I can't guarantee that, but I can definitely guarantee for today, you will see variances, but you're not going to see overhead variances. This is a little bit beyond what we expect you guys to do, but I think it's important to challenge you guys and to push you and get you ready for the more advanced classes and topics. The other cool thing I want you to get out of this video is how easy, once you set up an Excel spreadsheet, these problems get. You could take this spreadsheet and do 40 problems like this just by implementing different data. And the red data here is what you should put in. You got your formulas here, and the answers auto-populate. This could save you hours over your career just having this skill. So just want to excite you a little bit about Excel. Hopefully this gets you through your homework problem, and hopefully you're working on this before an hour before this homework's due, because it gets kind of hairy if you don't. All right, have a great day. Thanks, guys.